For 6 long years she had declined to engage with him, yet tonight offered no sanctuary. The Roon Araj Auditorium at Columbia University officially seats 800, but on this specific late October Thursday, the count swelled to 812. The fire marshal had shrewdly concluded that rejecting supporters of a sitting U.S. Congresswoman at the entrance would incite more chaos than squeezing in a handful of folding chairs. The occasion was dubbed the Future of the American Economy, a discussion featuring Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ben Shapiro. This was merely an academic euphemism implying that two adversaries who had circled one another on social media for half a decade were finally occupying the same physical space with active microphones. The narrative of how this clash came to be was straightforward. AOC had agreed to a Columbia University town hall regarding economic policy 3 months prior, given that her district sat nearby. The optics were impeccable, and her announcement on Instagram had garnered 40,000 likes in less than 60 minutes. In a burst of intellectual aspiration that the administration would later view with either pride or deep regret, the university summoned Shapiro to provide the counterpoint. Her team attempted to withdraw, but a letter from Columbia's provost, which leaked almost immediately, reminded the Congresswoman of her contract and the institution's commitment to the open exchange of concepts. She was cornered, a fact that was a secret to no one. Ocasio-Cortez arrived first, emerging from a black SUV at the side entrance, flanked by 3 aides and a communications director who was already live tweeting the transit from vehicle to venue. She was dressed in a white blazer over a burgundy top, sporting gold hoop earrings and the look of a woman who had spent a fortnight bracing for an interaction she never desired. The hall welcomed her in the manner that rooms packed with progressive Columbia students always welcome Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. A standing ovation erupted with such force that it vibrated the overhead lighting fixtures. She waved, she beamed, and she pointed toward an individual in the 3rd row, utilizing that politician's trick of appearing to recognize a familiar face. She claimed her spot on the left side of the stage behind a desk equipped with a microphone, a bottle of water, and a leather binder substantial enough to hold either her talking points or a novella. Shapiro turned up 11 minutes later. He entered through the primary doors by himself, carrying absolutely nothing. With no briefcase, no dossier, no water, and no script. He was clad in a dark suit with a white shirt and no tie, topped by a yarmulke that rested on his head with the quiet stability of a man who wears it daily and has never contemplated removing it. He stood 5 feet and 9 inches on a good day, and the venue's platform made him appear diminutive, as stages often do to those who do not occupy them with large physical gestures. The applause that met him was a charitable blend of reactions. A small pocket of college Republicans in the rear right corner clapped with vigor. A scattering of law students who were fans of his podcast provided a polite nod of recognition. The remainder of the room generated the noise of 800 individuals debating between silence and open antagonism, eventually settling on a low hum that resembled a refrigerator with a political opinion. Shapiro appeared oblivious to the reception, or if he did perceive it, he remained indifferent. He strode to his desk on the right, sat down, tweaked his microphone, and surveyed the crowd with the composed, intense look of a man who had been anticipating this specific instance for over 2,000 days. He was not keeping score, of course. The moderator, Dr. Sarah Chen, who chaired Columbia's economics department, presented both figures with the practiced neutrality of someone explicitly ordered by the provost to seem unbiased. She detailed the structure, which included opening remarks, a guided debate, and questions from the floor, before turning the floor over to AOC. Ocasio-Cortez rose to her feet. It was not required, as the rules permitted seated comments. Yet she stood because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez grasped a truth about theater that most elected officials realize too late. You cannot alter perspectives while sitting down. "Thank you, Columbia," she commenced, and her vocals possessed the rehearsed affection of 1,000 public meetings. "I am present this evening because I hold a conviction in something elementary. I trust that the wealthiest nation in the chronicles of human civilization possesses the means to care for its populace. I hold that health care is a fundamental right rather than a special privilege. I believe that pursuing an education should not lead you to financial ruin. I accept that the climate emergency is genuine and that we bear an ethical duty to take action." She hesitated for a moment. "I worked as a bartender for 4 years prior to standing on the floor of Congress. I understand the reality of working a double shift, yet failing to make rent. I know the feeling of praying your tooth remains intact because the dentist is unaffordable. I did not merely read about hardship in a white paper, I existed within it." The crowd exploded into noise. The standing ovation reappeared. AOC took her seat with the rhythm of someone who understood precisely how long to allow the cheering to swell before it crested. Shapiro waited for the auditorium to calm itself. He did not rise. He leaned toward his microphone with the bearing of a man prepared to say something vital, ensuring every syllable would find its mark. "Congresswoman," he stated, "I have been attempting to initiate this dialogue for 6 years." The hall fell hushed, not merely silent, but attentive. "In 2018, I tendered $10,000 to your campaign or a charity of your preference in exchange for 1 hour of your schedule. A discussion was all I asked. You described my invitation as catcalling. You likened a request for a policy debate to sexual harassment on a street corner." He paused, not for theatrical effect, but for accuracy. "Therefore, I am pleased we have graduated from catcalling to a formal town hall. I pledge to maintain my best conduct." A chuckle rippled through the hall, unforeseen and reflexive, the type of laughter that slips out before one's politics can suppress it. Even a few of the progressive students in the front rows concealed their grins. Shapiro's visage remained unaltered. "I am not present tonight to demolish anyone, as the Internet already possesses sufficient destructive material. I am here to pose a single inquiry." He gazed directly at AOC. "Does your arithmetic function correctly? Because if we intend to remodel the American economy, if we plan to fundamentally alter how 330 million individuals live, labor, and pay taxes, the figures must align. Emotions are significant. As I possess them, you possess them, and everyone in this venue possesses them. However, emotions do not balance ledgers. Emotions do not finance initiatives. Feelings do not place meals on tables." He reclined in his seat. "Can the most affluent nation in human history afford to look after its citizens? Let us discover the answer through mathematics." The audience was unaware of it then, but they had just witnessed the final instant that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would control the flow of this exchange. Dr. Chen steered the initial subject toward energy and climate strategy, which was the courteous academic method of saying Green New Deal, without utilizing the specific phrase that made half the crowd applaud and the other half groan. Shapiro took the lead. "I wish to commence by doing something that might astonish you. I am going to concur with the Congresswoman." AOC's eyebrows lifted a fraction of an inch, which in political body language is the counterpart of a double take. "Climate change is a reality," Shapiro asserted. "Human behavior contributes to it. I have no intention of sitting here to argue the existence of climate change, as that is not the purpose of tonight. What tonight concerns is whether the Green New Deal, your flagship policy, Congresswoman, the one you unveiled in 2019 and have campaigned upon for 6 years, can genuinely rectify the issue. Because those represent two vastly distinct inquiries. Desiring to repair something and possessing the capacity to repair it are not identical. I wish to dunk a basketball, but that does not imply I have the ability. A light laugh emerged from the crowd, Shapiro making a height joke at his own expense, being disarming and calculated to be exactly that. Let us examine the figures. Not my statistics, not Fox News statistics, and not Daily Wire statistics. The American Action Forum, a center-right policy institute, I will concede, but one staffed by legitimate economists, projected the Green New Deal would cost between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over a decade. He raised his palms. Now, I anticipate your rebuttal, that it is a right-wing think tank. Very well, let us utilize the lower boundary of $51 trillion. Let us be charitable. He listed facts the way others might crack their knuckles, swiftly and effortlessly, one following another. The total gross domestic product of the United States, everything this nation generates in a year, every burger sold, every automobile constructed, every surgery executed, is roughly $28 trillion. Your scheme, at its most inexpensive estimate, costs nearly double what the entire American economy generates in a calendar year. Federal revenue, meaning all taxes the government gathers from every person and corporation in America, is roughly $4.4 trillion annually. Your proposal costs more than 10 years of aggregate federal income, and that is revenue that is already allocated. It funds the military, Social Security, Medicare, highways, schools, and everything the government presently undertakes. He paused, not for long, as Shapiro did not employ long silences, but sufficient time for the digits to sink in. Now here is the enjoyable portion. If you taxed every individual billionaire in America at 100%, not merely a higher rate, but 100%, seizing every dollar they possess, you would gather approximately $4.5 trillion. Do you know what that funds? It covers about 5 to 8% of your agenda. Then there are no remaining billionaires. They are destitute. What do you do in the second year? AOC had been watching for a gap, and she seized it. You are utilizing exaggerated projections from a conservative institution to then supply me with yours, Shapiro retorted. He did not elevate his volume, as he had no need to do so. You presented this blueprint in 2019. It is now 2025, 6 years later. What is your cost projection? How much does the Green New Deal cost, according to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? The auditorium grew silent in a manner that had nothing to do with civility and everything to do with intrigue. 800 people leaned in by half an inch, awaiting a figure. AOC did not possess one. The cost of inaction, she commenced. That is not a numeral, Shapiro stated. That is a bumper sticker. I inquired how much your initiative costs. You have had 6 years, so surely someone on your payroll owns a calculator. The cost will rely on the specific implementation schedule and— You do not know, Shapiro said flatly. You have been marketing this plan to the American populace for 6 years, and you do not know its price. Congresswoman, if I walked into an auto dealership and asked the price of a vehicle, and the salesperson replied, "The cost of not purchasing this car is far greater," I would exit the dealership, and I would be correct to do so. He shifted forward. But it gets superior. Your original Green New Deal resolution, the one published on your official site with your name and logo, contained a line about supplying economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. Unwilling, not unable. Unwilling. AOC's expression constricted. That was a draft paper that was released prematurely by a staff member. It was on your website, Shapiro noted. It was under your name with your official congressional seal. If my producer accidentally uploaded a document on the Daily Wire stating, "We support revoking the Second Amendment," I would not label it a premature draft. I would call it a firing offense, and the document would still have existed. He turned to the crowd, not to AOC, but to the students. Here is what I wish for you to comprehend. I am not arguing against renewable energy. I am not arguing against environmental conservation. I am arguing against a scheme that lacks a cost estimate, lacks a viable funding mechanism, and included in its initial form the pledge of paying people who do not desire to labor. His voice lowered half a register. And the individuals who get damaged by schemes like this are not the people on this stage. The Congresswoman earns $174,000 a year. I do well. We will be fine. The people who are harmed are working families whose utility bills double when you attempt to eradicate fossil fuels in a decade. The small business owners who cannot absorb new regulations, the factory laborers whose positions vanish. He looked at AOC. You speak of the working class incessantly. You brand yourself as their defender, but your policies would ruin them. Not in theory, but in practice. Ask Germany, which attempted an aggressive green energy shift and witnessed electricity prices triple. Ask Sri Lanka, which tried to go fully organic overnight and sparked a food crisis that toppled the government. The path to economic ruin is paved with benevolent intentions, Congresswoman. And the Green New Deal isn't even paved. It is a trail of Instagram posts leading into a forest without a map. AOC's communications director in the front row was typing frantically, though whether she was drafting a rebuttal or updating a resume was unclear. But the Green New Deal is merely the start, Shapiro said. Let us discuss what occurs when slogans encounter mathematics. Dr. Chen introduced the subject of tax policy and income disparity, which Shapiro accepted the way a fastball pitcher accepts a batting practice toss. He received it with restrained zeal and very little exertion. In 2021, Shapiro began, the Congresswoman attended the Met Gala. For those unaware, the Met Gala is an annual fundraiser in New York City, where the wealthiest individuals in America pay $35,000 per ticket to dress in costumes and photograph one another. He paused. The Congresswoman wore a white gown with the words, "Tax the Rich," inscribed on the back. It was fashioned by Aurora James, who at the time owed approximately $10,000 in unpaid taxes. He allowed that fact to land. So, a Congresswoman attended a gala for the ultra-wealthy. She wore a dress created by a woman who does not pay her taxes. The dress read, "Tax the Rich," and the House Ethics Committee, just this past July, found that she violated House rules by accepting gifts she did not properly pay for. She was asked to remit an additional $3,000 in fair market value. Shapiro looked at the audience with a look of theatrical confusion. Congresswoman, I could not pen satire of this quality. If I pitched this as a Saturday Night Live sketch, Lorne Michaels would reject it for being too obvious. Laughter rippled through the auditorium louder than before. It crossed political lines. Comedy is bipartisan when the premise is sufficiently absurd, and this premise was absurd enough. AOC leaned into her microphone. I utilized that platform to bring a message regarding economic inequality to the people who benefit most from it. That dress ignited a national conversation about you, Shapiro said. The conversation was about you, not about tax policy, and not about income inequality. It was about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the Met Gala. You did not initiate a policy discussion. You initiated a news cycle. And the news cycle concluded when the next celebrity wore something peculiar, which at the Met Gala was approximately 15 minutes later. He shifted gears. The sarcasm receded by 1 degree, replaced by the focused intensity of a man who spent his formative years at Harvard Law learning to assemble arguments the way engineers assemble bridges. They were load-bearing, stress-tested, and very difficult to dismantle. But let us discuss the actual policy. Tax the rich. It is an excellent slogan. 3 syllables. It fits on a dress, it fits on a bumper sticker, and it fits on a tweet. The question is whether it fits on a spreadsheet. He began calculating. You have proposed a 70% marginal tax rate on income over $10 million. If implemented, that would generate approximately $72 billion per year in additional revenue. That sounds like a substantial amount. It is not. The federal deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it collects, is roughly $1.7 trillion. $72 billion covers about 4% of that gap. He held up 4 fingers. 4%. That is your 70% tax rate. 4% of the whole. Now let us go larger. Tax every billionaire in America at 100%. Take everything. Homes, stocks, cars, yachts, everything. You would collect about $4.5 trillion one time. Because after you seize everything, there is nothing left to seize. Federal spending is $6.2 trillion per year. You funded the government for approximately 9 months. Then what? He turned to AOC. This is where I genuinely desire your answer. Not your slogan, not tax the rich, but the math. You need $3.2 trillion per year for Medicare for all alone. Where does it come from? AOC responded with practiced fluency. We redirect military spending, close corporate tax loopholes, and implement a financial transactions tax. Let us add it up, Shapiro said, counting on his fingers the way a teacher counts for a student who insists 2 + 2 = 5. Military spending is $886 billion. Even if you cut it in half, and good luck getting that through Congress, that is $443 billion. Corporate tax loopholes. Close every single one. You might get to $600 billion total in corporate revenue. Financial transactions tax. Maybe $200 billion on an optimistic day. He added them up aloud. 443 plus 600 plus 200. That is $1.2 trillion. You need $3.2 trillion for health care alone. You are $2 trillion short. And we have not even started on free college, guaranteed jobs, or the Green New Deal. His voice was moving faster now, the way it always did when the numbers were on his side and the logical structure was airtight. Where does the money come from? Each word landed like a gavel. The answer is the middle class. It always comes from the middle class because there are not enough rich people. There have never been enough rich people. Every country that has tried to build a social safety net the size of what you are proposing has funded it with a broad-based tax on working people. Ask Scandinavia. Sweden's top marginal rate kicks in at about $60,000. $60,000. That is not taxing the rich, Congresswoman. That is taxing the waitress. AOC's prepared responses were running out. You could see it in the way her hands moved, reaching for the leather portfolio, pulling it closer as if the answers she needed were inside it, rather than inside her. Other countries managed to provide universal health care and education, she started. Name one, Shapiro said. Name one country with 330 million people, an $11 trillion military commitment, to global security, and the level of entitlement spending we already have that also provides free health care, free college, guaranteed jobs, and zero carbon emissions. He waited. Name one. I have time. The silence lasted 4 seconds. In debate terms, 4 seconds is a lifetime. 4 seconds is enough time for 800 people to reach the same conclusion simultaneously. She cannot. You cannot, Shapiro said quietly, because it does not exist. And the countries that tried versions of it, Venezuela, Cuba, the Soviet Union, are not exactly vacation destinations. He leaned back. But policy is hard. Numbers are cold. Let us talk about something warmer. Let us talk about honesty. Shapiro's tone shifted. The machine gun delivery did not slow, for Shapiro's delivery never really slowed. But the content changed texture. He was moving from policy to character, from numbers to narrative, and the transition was as deliberate as a key change in a piece of music. I want to show you a pattern, he said, turning to the audience rather than to AOC. Not a mistake, not a single incident. A pattern. He began with the border. In 2018, the Congresswoman traveled to a detention facility in Tornillo, Texas. Photographers captured images of her hands gripping a chain-link fence, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by what she was witnessing inside. He paused. Those photographs went viral. They were shared millions of times. They became iconic. They helped define her public image as a compassionate fighter for immigrant rights. But other photographs from the same event, taken by the same photographers at the same location from different angles, showed something the viral images did not. From the wider angle, you could see that the Congresswoman was standing at a fence along an access road. The facility was not visible from where she was standing. He held up both hands. Was she upset about immigration policy? I believe she was. Were children being detained in conditions that deserved scrutiny? Absolutely. Am I saying her emotions were not real? No. His hands came down. I am saying the staging was deliberate. There is a difference between feeling something and producing something, between genuine grief and a photo opportunity. And the difference matters because if you are performing compassion instead of practicing it, the people you claim to care about are not your cause. They are your content. AOC's voice cut through. I was genuinely devastated by what was happening to those children. I believe you, Shapiro said. But you chose the angle. You chose the fence. You chose the tears through the chain-link composition. You did not stumble upon an emotional moment. You directed one. He moved to the next data point. January 6th, 2021. The Capitol breach. A terrible day. I said so at the time, and I will say it now. What happened at the Capitol was wrong. It was destructive, and the people responsible should be prosecuted. No qualifications. The auditorium stirred. Shapiro condemning January 6th was not the script several hundred progressive students had prepared for that evening. The Congresswoman went on Instagram Live and described what she called a near-death experience. She told her followers, millions of them, that she feared for her life, that she was hiding in her office, that she heard pounding on the door, that she believed she was going to die. He paused. She was in the Cannon office building, which is across the street from the Capitol. A separate building connected by tunnels, yes, but a separate structure. The Cannon building was evacuated. That is real. The fear she felt may have been real. I am not inside her head. But her colleague, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who was in the same building on the same floor, called the account, and I am quoting, exaggerated. Because there is a difference between I was in a building that was evacuated as a precaution and I had a near-death experience. One of those is a factual description. The other is an Instagram narrative. He began building the pattern, laying bricks one on top of another the way a mason builds a wall. Each one small, each one solid, each one making the structure taller and harder to ignore. Order photo staged for maximum emotional impact. January 6th narrated for maximum dramatic effect. Met Gala costumed for maximum social media engagement. Instagram Lives where she cooks mac and cheese and talks about policy in her kitchen produced for maximum parasocial connection. He turned to AOC. Congresswoman, you are the most talented political performer of your generation. I mean that as a genuine compliment. You understand media branding and emotional storytelling better than anyone in Congress, possibly better than anyone in American politics since Ronald Reagan. The compliment landed strangely, too sincere to be mockery, too pointed to be flattery. But performance is not governance. Instagram followers are not legislation. Viral moments are not policy. And crying on camera, no matter how real the tears, does not feed a single hungry child. AOC leaned forward, and for the first time that evening, her voice carried heat that was not rehearsed. You sit behind a microphone every day and criticize people who actually do things. You have never run for office. You have never written a bill. You have never had a constituent call you at 2 a.m. because their mother needs insulin. You talk. That is all you do. The audience roared. This was the AOC they had come to see, fiery, direct, fighting back. Shapiro waited for the roar to fade. He did not interrupt it. He let it run its full course, the way you let a wave exhaust itself before stepping back onto the sand. You are right that I have never run for office, he said. I am a commentator. I talk for a living. I do not pretend otherwise. He leaned forward. But since you brought up doing things, what have you done in 6 years in Congress? What major piece of legislation with your name on it has been signed into law? The question was delivered without malice, almost gently, which made it worse. You have introduced the Green New Deal, which received 0 yes votes in the Senate. 0. Not a single member of your own party voted for it. You have proposed Medicare for all, which has never reached the floor. You co-sponsored a stock trading ban, which, and I will come back to this, I actually support. He spread his hands. In 6 years, you have accumulated 8.25 million followers on Twitter. You have one of the largest social media presences of any politician in America. You have appeared on magazine covers, late-night shows, and documentary films. His voice dropped. And your major legislative accomplishment is a stock trading ban that has not passed yet. He looked at the audience. 8.5 million followers. 0 major bills signed into law. If you ran a business with that ratio of marketing to product, you would be bankrupt. AOC's staffers in the front row had stopped typing. One of them was staring at the floor. But I have been hard on you, Shapiro said, and I want to be fair. So let me give you credit for something real. What happened next was not in anyone's script. The college Republicans in the back row had been building toward a sustained cheer. The kind of rolling tribal applause that sounds less like agreement and more like a football chant. The progressive students were quiet, deflated, scrolling through their phones for counter-arguments the way soldiers reload in a foxhole. The moderate middle, the political science majors, the economics students, the kids who came because their professors offered extra credit, were leaning forward in their chairs. They wore the expression of people watching something they hadn't expected to be this interesting. And then Shapiro said something that stopped every person in the room. I want to say something that might surprise everyone here. Congresswoman, you are right about the stock trading ban. The college Republicans froze mid-clap. The progressive students looked up from their phones. AOC turned her head toward Shapiro with the wary expression of a woman who suspects a trap but cannot yet see where it is hidden. Members of Congress should not be permitted to trade individual stocks while in office, Shapiro continued. Period. Full stop. No exceptions. You co-sponsored the Restore Trust in Congress Act. I support that bill. I have said so on my show. I have written about it. Nancy Pelosi is wrong on this issue. Your own party's leadership was wrong to resist it for years. He looked at the audience. See, I can say a Democrat is right. It does not cause physical pain. I did not burst into flames. Try it sometime. Next time a Republican proposes something reasonable, just yeah, that is a good idea. I promise the earth will not swallow you. Scattered, confused laughter. The auditorium did not know what to do with a Ben Shapiro who was agreeing with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It was like watching a cat befriend a bird. Technically possible, deeply suspicious, and almost certainly temporary. The reason I can agree with you on stocks, Shapiro continued, and here his voice shifted from conciliatory to surgical, is that the stock trading ban is based on facts, evidence, logic. You identified a real problem. Members of Congress trading stocks based on information the public does not have. And you proposed a real, workable solution. No fantasies, no trillion-dollar price tags, no promises of economic security for people unwilling to work. Just, here is a corruption problem, here is a law that fixes it. He turned to her. And that is what frustrates me about you, Congresswoman. Because the stock trading ban proves you can do this. You can identify problems, propose practical solutions, and build bipartisan support. You have the talent. You have the platform. You have the communication skills that most politicians would trade their careers for. His voice softened. Not much, but enough for the room to notice. And instead of using those skills to build practical, evidence-based policy, you use them to sell fantasies. The Green New Deal, Medicare for all funded by taxing a handful of billionaires, guaranteed jobs for everyone, free everything for everyone. The one time you relied on facts instead of feelings, you got it right. Which makes it worse, not better, because it means you know the difference. You know what real policy looks like, and you choose the fantasy anyway, because fantasies get more Instagram likes than spreadsheets. AOC tried to use the opening, so you acknowledge that we agree on more than you would like to admit. On one thing, Shapiro said, out of dozens of proposals, if you went 1 for 40 in baseball, you would be cut from a Little League team. In Congress, you would be the future of the Democratic Party. The laugh that came from the audience was the biggest of the night. It came from everywhere. Left, right, center, back row, front row. The involuntary laugh of people who recognize a perfectly constructed joke regardless of whether they want to. AOC did not laugh. Her jaw tightened. She reached for her water bottle, took a deliberate sip, and set it down with more force than the gesture required. Which brings me, Shapiro said, and his voice changed again, dropping the sarcasm the way a surgeon drops a used scalpel into a tray. To what this is really about. The auditorium felt the shift before they heard it. Something in Shapiro's posture changed. As the forward lean, the predatory stance of a debater searching for openings, softened into something else. He sat back in his chair. His hands, which had been moving constantly for 4 chapters, counting, gesturing, punctuating, went still. They rested on the table, fingers loosely interlaced, and didn't move again for several minutes. When he spoke, the velocity that had defined every word he had said that evening was gone. In its place was something the audience had never heard from Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro had spent a career making sure they never would. Vulnerability. "I want to tell you something personal," he said, "and I need to be honest. I am not great at personal. I am better at facts and arguments and being sarcastic on the internet. I have built a career on being the fastest talker in the room, so bear with me while I slow down." The room went still. Not quiet, but still. The difference is important, as quiet is the absence of noise, while stillness is the presence of attention. "I am an Orthodox Jew. I wear this yarmulke every day. I keep Shabbat every Friday night. My phone goes off, my computer goes off, and I sit at a table with my wife and my children, and we light candles and eat dinner together. No Twitter, no podcasts, no debate clips, just family." He looked down at his hands. "My wife is a doctor. She went to medical school, which means she spent 4 years learning, 3 years in residency, and more years than she will admit in fellowship. She works hours that would break most people. She comes home exhausted, and she still sits down and helps our kids with their homework every night." His voice was doing something it had never done on his podcast, in his lectures, or in any of the hundreds of debate clips that had been viewed billions of times across the internet. It was trembling. Not much, merely the way a bridge trembles under heavy traffic, structurally sound, but carrying more weight than usual. When you say tax the rich, Congresswoman, you are not talking about Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos has accountants, he has lawyers, he has offshore structures and charitable trusts and holding companies. He will be fine. He will always be fine. You are talking about my wife. You are talking about the doctor who works 80 hours a week and earns enough to live in an expensive city and put her kids in a decent school and pay her student loans, which, by the way, she is still paying, and save a little for retirement. That is the rich you are taxing." He looked up. "You're talking about the small business owner in the Bronx, your district, the guy who took out a second mortgage to open a bodega, who works from 5 in the morning until 10 at night, who employs 4 people and barely breaks even. You are going to raise his taxes, increase his regulatory burden, and double his energy costs, and then tweet about how you are fighting for the working class. You are talking about the immigrant family who saved for 20 years to buy a laundromat in Queens, who send their kids to public school and hope they will be the first in the family to go to college. Those people are not rich, Congresswoman. They are trying, and your policies punish them for trying." The auditorium had gone church silent. The college Republicans had stopped clapping. The progressive students had stopped scrolling. 812 people were watching a man they thought they knew reveal something they had never seen. "My grandparents came to this country with nothing." His voice cracked on the word nothing. It was a small crack, a hairline fracture in a wall of marble. But in the absolute stillness of that auditorium, 800 people heard it. They survived things I will not describe in this room because some horrors deserve more than a debate talking point. They came to America. They did not speak the language. They had no money, no connections, no safety net. They worked in factories, they worked in shops. They lived in a small apartment, and they sent their children to school. And 2 generations later, their grandson graduated from Harvard Law School. He paused. Not because of a government program, not because of a Green New Deal, not because some politician promised them free everything, because America, This flawed, messy, imperfect country gave them something no government program can provide: the freedom to build something with their own hands. He turned to AOC. The sarcasm was gone. The debate tactics were gone. The rapid-fire delivery was gone. What remained was a man speaking from a place that no amount of rhetorical training can manufacture. Your vision, democratic socialism, does not get out of people's way. It gets in their way. More regulation, more taxes, more government programs, more committees deciding how much energy you can use, what car you can drive, what stove you can cook on. More dependency, more control. And the people it hurts are not the billionaires at your Met Gala. It is the people trying to become unpoor. The people on the first rung of the ladder who need the ladder to stay where it is, not be redesigned by a committee in Washington. His voice steadied. When you promise people free everything, free health care, free college, free housing, guaranteed jobs, you are not liberating them. You are teaching them that they cannot do it themselves, that they need the government to survive, that without Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's programs, they are helpless. He shook his head. That is not compassion. That is a cage with nice wallpaper. He looked at her one last time in this chapter. You know this, Congresswoman. You are from the Bronx. You have seen what dependency does. You have seen the housing projects that were supposed to lift people up and instead trapped them for generations. You have seen the welfare programs that were supposed to be temporary and became permanent. You have seen it, and yet you want more of it. Not because it works. We have 60 years of evidence that it does not. But because it sounds compassionate. Because it photographs well. Because it goes viral. He sat back. Facts do not care about your feelings, Congresswoman, but more importantly, your feelings do not pay anyone's rent. The room was silent for 7 full seconds after he stopped speaking. 7 seconds in which no one clapped. No one booed. No one moved. 7 seconds in which 812 people sat with the particular discomfort of having heard something they could not dismiss as partisan performance. Because they had watched the performance fall away, and what was left underneath was harder to argue with than any statistic. Dr. Chen broke the silence by calling for the final segment. Her voice was neutral. Her eyes were not. AOC stood up, not the way she had stood at the beginning of the evening. The politicians stand. The practiced rise. The podium-ready posture of a woman who had spent 6 years learning how to command a room. This was different. This was a woman who had been hit and was choosing to hit back. And the choice to stand was not theatrical, but instinctive, the way a boxer gets off the stool when the bell rings for the final round. You want to talk about personal, she said, and her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. The edge of someone who is done being careful. Let me tell you about personal. The auditorium shifted. This was the AOC they had come to see. 4 years before I was a congresswoman, I was standing behind a bar in Manhattan, pouring drinks for men in suits who made more money in a bonus than I made in a year. I worked doubles. I took the subway home at 2 in the morning. I had student loan debt I could not see the end of. My father died of cancer when I was in college. And my family almost lost our home because the medical bills were so high that my mother had to work 3 jobs. Her voice did not crack. It hardened. I did not have a Harvard degree. I did not have a podcast. I did not have a platform. I had a pair of black, non-slip shoes and a hope that someday the system might work for people like me. She pointed at Shapiro. You sit there with your Harvard law education and your media empire and your comfortable life, and you lecture me about the working class. I was the working class. I didn't read about it in a textbook or analyze it in a think tank. I lived it. I lived in it. I lived through it. The audience erupted. The standing ovation came fast and loud, led by the progressive students who had been waiting all evening for this moment. Even some of the moderates stood. The sound filled the auditorium like a wave, and it carried with it all the accumulated tension of the evening. The frustration, the defensiveness, the 2 hours of watching their champion be pressed into a corner. AOC continued over the applause. You know what it's like to skip a meal so you can make rent. You know what it's like to choose between a doctor's visit and a phone bill. You know what it's like to watch your mother cry at the kitchen table because she doesn't know how she's going to keep the lights on. She leaned into the microphone. That is why I fight for these policies, not because of Instagram, not because of Twitter followers. Because somewhere in this city right now, there is a 23-year-old bartender working a double shift and praying her tooth doesn't break. And she deserves better than a podcast host telling her the math doesn't work. The applause crashed again, louder. AOC sat down with the fierce satisfaction of a fighter who has landed a clean combination. Shapiro did not move during any of it. He did not interrupt the applause. He did not shift in his chair. He did not reach for water or check his notes. He had no notes to check. He sat perfectly still, with the patience of a man who has been in enough debates to know that the most dangerous moment for an opponent is right after their strongest punch, because that is when they think they have won, and that is when they stop guarding. The applause faded. Dr. Chen looked at Shapiro. "Congresswoman," he said, "everything you just said is true." The room blinked metaphorically. You worked hard. You struggled. You overcame. You went from a bar in Manhattan to the United States Congress. Your father died too young and your family nearly lost everything. Those are real experiences, real pain, real strength. He nodded. Not the quick, dismissive nod of a debater conceding a point to set up a counterattack. A genuine nod of respect from one human being to another. But here is my question. The room went quiet, in a way that was different from all the other silences of the evening. This silence had weight. This silence had teeth. You went from bartender to congresswoman. You did it in the United States of America, in the free market economy. Under the constitutional system, you want to fundamentally restructure. He spoke slowly, each sentence its own paragraph. You did not need the Green New Deal to make that journey. You did not need democratic socialism. You did not need Medicare for all, or a guaranteed government job, or economic security for people unwilling to work. You needed opportunity. And America, this imperfect capitalist free market America, gave it to you. The silence deepened. You could hear the ventilation system. So my question is this. Why are you trying to dismantle the system that made your story possible? AOC opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Why are you trying to replace the ladder you climbed with an escalator designed by bureaucrats? Why are you telling the next 23-year-old bartender that she cannot do what you did? That she needs the government to do it for her? He leaned forward. You, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are the single best argument against your own policies. You are living, breathing proof that free markets, individual liberty, and limited government create more opportunity than any socialist program ever designed on any chalkboard in any faculty lounge at any university in the history of the world. Your story doesn't support democratic socialism. Your story refutes it. Every chapter of your life, the struggle, the work, the risk, the victory, happened not because the government gave you something, but because America gave you the freedom to earn it yourself. The trap was perfect, not because it was unfair, but because it was true. AOC's greatest strength, her personal narrative, the bartender to Congresswoman story she had told 1,000 times on 1,000 stages, had been turned with surgical precision into the most devastating argument against her ideology. And the worst part, the part that would keep her awake at 3 in the morning for weeks, was that she couldn't refute it without denying her own life. "You are not the future of the Democratic Party, Congresswoman," Shapiro said quietly. "You are the future of the American story. You are proof that it works. All of it. The freedom, the risk, the opportunity. The imperfect, messy, beautiful system that took a bartender and made her a congresswoman. But only if you stop trying to replace that system with one that has never worked anywhere. It's been tried." Dr. Chen called time. The auditorium responded not with the unified roar of a crowd that agrees, but with the fractured, complicated sound of 800 people processing something they hadn't expected to feel. The college Republicans stood and clapped. A section of progressive students sat in silence, not hostile, but thoughtful. The particular silence of young people who have heard something they need to think about before they decide what they believe. A woman in the middle section, a graduate student in a "Nevertheless, she persisted" t-shirt, was clapping slowly with an expression on her face that suggested the clapping was involuntary, and she wasn't entirely sure who she was clapping for. AOC gathered her portfolio. She stood. She shook Dr. Chen's hand. She turned to Shapiro and, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough for every camera in the room to capture it, extended her hand to him as well. He shook it firmly, briefly, without performance. She walked off the stage without looking back. Her staffers closed around her like a formation, and they disappeared through the side exit into the October night, where a black SUV was already waiting with the engine running. Shapiro sat at the table for a moment after she left. He looked at the empty chair across from him, at the abandoned water bottle, at the leather portfolio she'd left behind. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked off the stage through the main exit. He passed 800 people who watched him go and walked into a hallway where no one was waiting for him because he had come alone. The clip hit 50 million views before midnight. Not the whole debate. The internet doesn't have the patience for 4 hours of policy discussion. The clip, the 1-minute and 42-second sequence that began with "You went from bartender to congresswoman," and ended with "Stop trying to replace that system with one that has never worked anywhere it's been tried." By Friday morning, it was the most shared political video in the country. By Saturday, it had been translated into 14 languages. By Sunday, the think pieces had arrived. A blizzard of analysis from every direction, each one claiming to have identified the definitive takeaway from the Shapiro-AOC debate, each one disagreeing with all the others. Fox News ran the debate as a triumph. CNN ran it as a spectacle. MSNBC's panel spent an uncomfortable segment arguing about whether Shapiro had been condescending. Before a guest, a former Obama speechwriter, quietly noted that condescending and correct are not mutually exclusive, and we should probably address the math. The panel moved on quickly. The New York Times published a fact check the following Wednesday. The Green New Deal cost estimates Shapiro cited were in the range of credible projections, the article concluded. The taxation math was substantially accurate. The Met Gala ethics finding was a matter of public record. The assessment of AOC's legislative record was reductive but not inaccurate. It was the kind of fact check that technically found no falsehoods, but clearly wished it had. AOC posted an Instagram response later that evening, 19 minutes long, 2.3 million views. She was in her apartment, sitting at her kitchen counter, speaking directly into her phone camera the way she always did. No makeup, no script, no staffers. It was powerful. It was authentic. It was everything her supporters loved about her. It did not address the math. It did not explain how the Green New Deal would be funded. It did not reconcile the 70% tax rate with the deficit. It did not answer the question about her legislative record. It addressed the feeling of the debate, the frustration, the sense of being attacked, the emotional toll of being told your math doesn't work by a man who talks faster than anyone should be allowed to talk. And for her audience, that was enough. But for the audience that doesn't live on Instagram, the truck drivers and accountants and small business owners and retired school teachers who watched the clips on YouTube or Facebook or heard about it from their kids, the unanswered questions hung in the air, the way unanswered questions do, quietly, persistently, like a bill that's past due and getting harder to ignore. Shapiro gave no victory speeches. He did what he always did after significant public events. He recorded the next day's podcast, 2 hours as usual. He spent the first 20 minutes on the debate, offered his assessment with his characteristic blend of analysis and self-deprecation. I think the Congresswoman is more talented than I am. I just happen to have the numbers on my side, which is an unfair advantage in a debate about numbers, and then moved on to the day's news. Because for Ben Shapiro, the debate was not a culmination. It was a Tuesday. The interview that went viral wasn't the one on his podcast. It was a 30-second phone clip recorded by a Daily Wire producer the following morning, catching Shapiro as he walked his children to school. "How do you think the debate went?" the producer asked. Shapiro, holding a backpack in one hand and his daughter's hand in the other, glanced at the camera. "I think she's smart, and I think she's wrong. Those aren't contradictory. Some of the smartest people I know are wrong about important things. The hope is that the conversation moves the needle. Not for her. She's locked in. But for the people watching who haven't made up their minds yet. What do you say to people who think you were too hard on her?" Shapiro stopped walking. His daughter tugged at his hand, impatient with the delay. "I don't think asking for a cost estimate is being hard on someone. I think it's the minimum. If you're going to ask the American people to restructure their economy, you owe them a number. She doesn't have one. That's not my fault." He resumed walking. The producer, sensing one more moment, called after him. "Did you win?" Shapiro didn't turn around. "Nobody wins a debate," he said over his shoulder, his daughter pulling him toward the crosswalk. "You just hope the truth does." That Friday evening, the Shapiro household observed Shabbat, as it always did. The phones were turned off at sundown. The laptops closed. The podcasts, the tweets, the debate clips, the 50 million views, all of it receded behind a wall of candlelight and silence, and the smell of challah bread. His wife asked how his week was. He said it was long. She asked about the debate. She hadn't watched it because she had been at the hospital delivering someone's baby, which was, she pointed out, a more productive use of a Thursday evening. He laughed. His daughter, who was 7 and understood politics the way 7-year-olds understand earthquakes, she knew they happened and they were loud, asked what the debate was about. "Math," Shapiro said. It was about math. She asked who won. He looked at his wife, then at his daughter, then at the candles, which were doing what candles do on Friday nights in Orthodox Jewish homes around the world, burning slowly, casting warm shadows on the walls, measuring out the hours of a day of rest in a world that rarely rests. "Nobody wins a debate," he said. "You just hope the truth does." His daughter considered this. "That's not a real answer," she said. "No," Shapiro agreed. "It's not?" She went back to her soup. He went back to his. The candles burned. Outside, New York City hummed with its inexhaustible, indifferent energy. 8 million people living their lives, paying their bills, arguing about politics, hoping their teeth didn't break. The debate was already fading from the news cycle. Something else would replace it by Monday. Something always does. But somewhere in the Bronx, a 23-year-old bartender with student loans and sore feet, and a dream she hadn't told anyone about yet, was closing down her bar for the night. She had watched clips of the debate on her phone during her break. She wasn't sure who had won. She wasn't sure it mattered. But she was thinking about the question. The one about the ladder and the escalator. The one about whether the system that let a bartender become a congresswoman was worth preserving or replacing. She didn't have an answer yet, but she was thinking about it. And in America, that's how everything starts.